He was once the pulse of the music industry, the architect of dreams, the face of a movement, but in the span of months, the name that echoed through award shows and luxury fashion houses became a whisper behind closed doors. Sean Combs, the mogul who built empires on rhythm and spectacle, now sits in a detention center, watching the walls close in around a legacy-turned battleground. The courtroom has become his new arena, and the stakes are no longer gold plaques and chart-topping hits but his freedom, his future, and everything he thought he had buried in the past. From the moment the video surfaced grainy, undeniable, the public perception began to crack. That hotel hallway footage became more than evidence. It became a reckoning. What had been whispered behind closed doors, hinted at in cryptic interviews, encircled in lawsuits, now stood frozen on the screen. A moment of violence, a truth no longer deniable. Combs' apology came quickly, but it didn't echo with the power of his past anthems. It trembled. It landed hollow. His arrest, months later, wasn't dramatic in the way his parties had been, but it hit just as hard. The Park Hyatt Hotel in Manhattan became the stage for a very different moment. No red carpet, no entourage, just federal agents in steel cuffs. The man who once held court at the top of the world was now standing before a federal magistrate, charged with running a criminal enterprise that spanned decades, states, and lives. The indictment was a map of horror: racketeering, sex trafficking, interstate transportation for prostitution. Details that chilled even the most jaded observers. The term freak-offs alone vividly described as drug-fueled, days-long events involving coercion and hidden cameras was a grotesque mirror held up to the glamour Combs once sold. Federal prosecutors painted a picture of a man who used his companies, his employees, and even his own family name as tools in a long-running scheme built on manipulation, violence, and exploitation. He was flanked by his sons in court. His attorneys projected confidence, offering $50 million in property-backed bail to keep him out of jail before trial. The judge didn't blink. The motion was denied. The man who once walked into every room with the energy of a king now returned to the cold, locked echo of the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. Gone were the tailored suits, the champagne flutes, the flashbulbs. In their place, steel bars, fluorescent lights, and the weight of unanswered accusations. And the world kept watching, not just to see what would happen to Combs but to find out who else might fall. Federal investigators made it clear, this wasn't over, not even close. Victims were still coming forward. Witnesses were still being interviewed. Subpoenas were still being served. Behind every celebrity photo, every studio contract, every luxury yacht party, there were questions. Who knew? Who helped? Who stayed silent? Who might be next? The biggest bombshell wasn't just Combs' alleged crimes, it was the volume of those willing to talk. The attorney, now representing over 120 individuals who planned to file civil claims, wasn't making vague threats. 25 of those alleged victims were minors, and every new lawsuit had the potential to trigger another criminal charge, another arrest, another name pulled into the storm. But the feds had the video. They had the cell phone data. They had the paper trail. But what they wanted most were voices. People willing to testify. To sit under oath and name names. And when the trial begins, currently scheduled for May 2025, it won't be just Sean Combs' life on the line. It may be a courtroom full of secrets, decades in the making, finally dragged into the light. The defense was already telegraphing its strategy. Consent, that everything, every party, every act, was between adults making choices. But prosecutors weren't chasing freakiness. They were building a case on coercion, on fear, on silence bought with luxury. The trial would hinge not just on what happened but why, and whether those involved truly had any choice at all. And if Combs takes the stand again, as he once did decades ago, it will be a different jury, a different era, a different world, less forgiving of fame, more skeptical of power, and ready finally to listen to the people who had been shouting into the void for years. Now, all that's left is the waiting for more names, more charges, more revelations. Because whether Combs ends up convicted or walks free, the curtain has already lifted. The illusion is gone, and the empire, once seemingly untouchable, is no longer dancing to the beat of its master. The beat now belongs to the courtroom. The air in the courtroom was thick with expectation when the U.S. attorney stepped forward to declare that Sean Combs had been indicted, not just for racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking, but also for transporting individuals across state lines for the purpose of prostitution. The moment sent ripples through the room, and outside the courthouse, media vans fired up generators and camera crews jostled for position. 6 months had passed since federal agents stormed Combs' mansions in Miami and Los Angeles in a synchronized operation, seeking the hidden layers of a lifestyle long whispered about but never proven until now. And as the indictment details spilled into public view, the phrase freak-offs became a chilling signature of what prosecutors alleged was the heart of Combs' shadow empire. According to the U.S. attorney, Combs had orchestrated elaborate parties where commercial sex workers, often flown in across state lines, were made to perform an act he meticulously filmed, using coercion, threats, and manipulation as his currency. The footage, investigators claimed, not only captured disturbing scenes but corroborated stories from victims too afraid to speak until now. In the wake of the arrest, Combs's attorneys launched a $50 million bail proposal backed by Florida real estate, including properties owned by his mother, but prosecutors fought back hard. Citing the sheer scale of the accusations, his influence, his wealth, and the chilling allegations of witness intimidation, the judge agreed with the government, ruling that Combs would remain behind bars, triggering a media frenzy and a visible crack in the once mighty facade of the hip-hop mogul. Inside the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, a far cry from his sprawling estates, Combs now sits in a cell where the lights never dim and the temperature swings wildly, awaiting a trial that could redefine not just his legacy, but the very culture he helped create. More lawsuits poured in as the days passed. Models, former employees, old collaborators, all alleging a pattern of behavior that painted a grim mosaic of abuse cloaked in celebrity. As the court date loomed, whispers of superseding indictments grew louder, with federal agents rumored to be pursuing additional witnesses, perhaps even co-conspirators, as they peeled back the layers of Combs's empire like an onion soaked in decades of secrecy. The defense continued to push the narrative that all acts had been consensual, and that the so-called freak-offs were nothing more than adult expressions of freedom among willing participants. But behind the courtroom doors, prosecutors methodically compiled digital evidence, text messages, surveillance footage, and recorded conversations. Meanwhile, others in the industry began to distance themselves, not just with social media scrubs, but by severing musical and business ties, erasing collaborations, and removing his name from streaming credits. Artists who once toasted to his success now muttered words of caution, while longtime friends either fell silent or issued carefully worded statements about hope, healing, and justice. Even as Combs's attorneys doubled down on his innocence, federal investigators were rumored to be gathering fresh testimony from accusers who had long remained in the shadows. The fear once instilled by a name synonymous with power was now giving way to a collective reckoning. If convicted on all counts, legal analysts predicted a sentence that could stretch into life behind bars, depending on whether charges were served consecutively. Yet in this high-profile prosecution, nothing was certain, except that the man who once declared himself the embodiment of love now stood accused of orchestrating a vast machine of coercion, silence, and control. And with the trial tentatively set for May 2025, the clock ticks forward toward a verdict that could either confirm the darkest suspicions about a music legend or trigger the kind of backlash that leaves institutions themselves shaken. In every corner of the courtroom, in every whispered conversation outside its walls, one question remains: how deep does the rabbit hole go, and who else might be pulled down with him? As the dust of the indictment settled, the ripples spread far beyond the courthouse, hitting the recording studios of Los Angeles, the boardrooms of streaming platforms, and the marble offices of fashion brands that once begged for Sean Combs' endorsement. The machine that had fed off his cultural gravity was now quietly reversing itself, cutting ties, scrubbing credits, pausing collaborations, pretending the same mogul they once celebrated was suddenly unfamiliar. In the weeks following the indictment, the silence was shattered not just by headlines but by an avalanche of civil suits, more than 100%, according to lawyers who stood before cameras with portfolios bursting with allegations, each more graphic and damning than the last. Among them were stories that went back decades, some from alleged minors, some from former employees, all painting a portrait of a man who weaponized power and fame to create an ecosystem of fear, sex, and control. The most haunting claims came from those who said they were used and discarded at his infamous parties, described by plaintiffs and prosecutors alike as freak-offs, orgies of submission filmed, archived, and used as leverage against those who dared speak out. Women said they were drugged and coerced, men claimed they were manipulated and silenced, and through it all loomed the figure of Combs, charismatic in public, allegedly monstrous in private. Defense attorneys pushed back furiously, calling the flood of accusations opportunistic, the product of a media-fueled frenzy, and insisted that no crime had taken place, just consensual behavior between adults and a smear campaign cloaked in legalese. But behind the scenes, federal agents were tightening their grip, cross-referencing digital files seized from Combs's homes with statements from new witnesses, including a former assistant who had allegedly cataloged the recordings, a driver who said he transported victims across state lines, and even a security contractor who claimed he had destroyed tapes under orders. At the heart of the case, prosecutors insisted, was not just one man's perversion, but an organized, deliberate structure that operated with the efficiency of a criminal syndicate. Yet what haunted the narrative most wasn't what Combs had done alone, but who might have helped him, whether by action, silence, or complicity. Whispers grew louder about other named celebrities, executives, even royalty whose mere presence at those parties captured in photographs or surveillance footage, could now invite scrutiny. As defense attorneys begged for redactions and protective orders, prosecutors were said to be drafting a superseding indictment, one that could pull in co-defendants and detail an even more expansive network of enablers. Meanwhile, from inside his cell at MDC Brooklyn, Combs was reported to be unraveling slowly, keeping a small circle, dictating statements through lawyers, and rewatching the footage that had made him powerful now evidence of his fall. And outside the prison walls, as the music industry's silence became unbearable, more artists came forward not just to condemn him, but to admit they had seen things and said nothing. Some apologized. Some vanished. A few warned that Combs was not the only one, and that his prosecution would be just the beginning. The empire, once buoyed by gold records and champagne toasts, was crumbling under the weight of a truth long buried, and now roaring into the light. The world waited, not just for justice, but for the next name to fall, as prosecutors quietly prepared a superseding indictment. The scope of the case began to swell like a long-buried infection. Breaking the surface, new witnesses were flown in under federal protection, their names sealed by the court, their statements already painting a broader, darker picture that stretched beyond Diddy's own hands. Whispers inside legal circles hinted that this next filing wouldn't just deepen the charges, it would add names, some familiar, some once untouchable. Investigators were said to be re-interviewing former associates, reviewing flight logs, pouring through decades of NDAs and settlement agreements paid out by shell companies connected to Combs's various ventures. And as those dots connected, an unspoken question hovered. Who else knew? Who else helped? Among the rumors was a once trusted confidant whose digital signature had been discovered on access logs to a locked media archive containing hours of alleged freak-off footage. Another name blurred in the background of party photos and named and redacted documents was reportedly negotiating a cooperation deal in exchange for immunity. Behind closed doors, music executives scrambled, afraid their promotional texts or backstage visits might surface in discovery. Others hired crisis PR firms, erasing social media trails and quietly selling off bad boy catalog rights. Meanwhile, inside MDC Brooklyn, Combs was still holding court, demanding filtered water, allegedly trying to use commissary power to buy silence from other inmates. But the walls were closing in. Gone were the jet rides, the tailored suits, the illusion of invincibility. A new nickname began circulating among staff and prisoners alike. King Takedown, a mocking reference to both his past and the reckoning he could no longer outrun. His attorneys tried to keep up, filing motion after motion to suppress evidence, dismiss counts, unseal witness identities, but each was met with a silent denial or sealed counter. The federal government wasn't just building a case against a man, they were preparing to expose an entire system, one stitched together by power, money, and the myth of celebrity immunity. With every week, more civil suits were filed, many of them echoing the same patterns of grooming, coercion, and surveillance. One involved a then 17-year-old backup dancer allegedly flown to Miami on a fake work visa. Another, a hotel manager who said she was paid weekly in cash to ignore screaming. Behind closed penthouse doors, each suit added more kindling to a fire that now threatened to engulf every brand, artist, or executive who had once profited from being near Combs's orbit. And yet, through it all, the man himself refused to fold. "They want my name," he reportedly told a guard. "They can't erase what I built," but what he had built, albums, fashion lines, spirits, shows, was now turning against him. Sponsors pulled out. His vodka deal collapsed. Streaming services removed entire sections of his catalog, and in a twist only reality could write. A once upcoming documentary about his cultural influence was shelved indefinitely, its producers now cooperating with the FBI. The empire hadn't just cracked, it had started bleeding. And as spring turned to summer, one thing became clear to everyone watching. Diddy's fall was no longer about one man, it was about how much the world was willing to finally see. Inside a sealed courtroom in the Southern District of New York, where the press was kept behind layers of glass and the jury selection had stretched across 3 weeks, the trial of Sean Diddy Combs officially began. It was unlike any case in recent memory. More than just a prosecution of one man, it felt like the moment the veil was being ripped off. Decades of Hollywood secrecy. The prosecution wasted no time. Their opening statement was surgical, delivered by a lead, a USA, with a calm, clear voice and no need for theatrics. "This is not about music. This is not about money. This is about power abused, hidden, and enforced by fear." Then came the photos, the text messages, the digital receipts. But most importantly, the women. Jane Doe 1 was the first witness to take the stand. She'd been granted anonymity and entered the courtroom with her face shielded behind a black privacy screen. Her voice trembled at first, then sharpened with every sentence. "He told me to smile for the camera while I cried," she said. He said pain made it more real. The room held its breath. Over the course of several days, Jane Doe 1 was followed by Jane Doe 2. Then a surprise, a former male security contractor turned whistleblower who testified that he had installed hidden cameras across multiple Diddy-owned properties. He wanted every angle. He said it was insurance, the contractor explained, holding up diagrams of bedroom layouts and security logs with access times. The footage, now classified as sealed federal evidence, was played in part for the jury, but only audio clips were made available to the public. Still, what leaked was enough. One clip, described by court observers, captured screams, muffled by music, and a voice believed to be Combs issuing a command: "Turn the lights red, don't let them leave." The defense tried to paint these encounters as consensual, part of a private lifestyle between adults. They brought in experts on polyamorous relationships, kink culture, and industry norms. They also leaned hard on celebrity character witnesses, some who reluctantly appeared, others who suddenly became unavailable. A surprise witness for the defense, an R&B icon, took the stand and claimed she had never seen Combs act violently. But her cross-examination unraveled that claim when prosecutors revealed text messages from her, dated years earlier. "I left early. He was on something." The girl was crying. Another nail in the coffin. Then came Cassie. She walked in quietly. No makeup, no jewelry, just a steady presence in a trial that was already on fire. Her testimony was measured, devastating, and without embellishment. "He didn't just take my body, he took my will," she said. When she described the night of the hotel assault, already made infamous by the leaked video, the courtroom froze. "He told me, 'No one will believe you. I'm too big to fall.'" Her words echoed off the walls. The jury, some visibly shaken, scribbled notes feverishly. By the fourth week, a new wave of drama arrived. Rumors swirled of a possible plea deal. Combs's legal team had reportedly met with prosecutors behind closed doors, but nothing came of it, at least not publicly. Instead, prosecutors dropped a bombshell, a superseding indictment. New charges, 2 new alleged victims. One of them, according to court documents, was a minor at the time of the alleged assault. The courtroom gasped. The defense tried to delay the trial. The judge denied the motion. "We will proceed." On the outside, the cultural backlash was intensifying. Former collaborators denounced him. Companies publicly donated his previous profits to assault survivor organizations. Major streaming platforms removed his music from curated playlists. And even past collaborators who had once defended him now deleted posts, issued statements, or claimed ignorance. "We knew something was off," one producer told Rolling Stone. "We just didn't want to admit it." Back inside the courtroom, the final blow came when Rodney "Lil Rod" Jones testified. Calm, deliberate, and equipped with records. He used everyone. He filmed everything. He said he needed leverage in case people talked. When prosecutors asked him why he hadn't spoken sooner, his answer stunned the courtroom. "Because I thought the industry would kill me. But now I want to live." By the time closing arguments arrived, the prosecution's tone was almost quiet. This trial was not just about what happened. It's about who believed they could get away with it. "Today, you tell the world. No more." The defense pleaded with the jury to see a flawed man, not a predator. But the weight of the evidence and the collective pain carried into that courtroom was too much to ignore. The jury would return a verdict. But even before they did, one truth was clear. The era of Diddy was over. When the jury returned, it took just under 5 hours, an astonishingly short time given the complexity of the case and the months of testimony. They filed in silently, each face tight with something more than gravity. The foreperson, a retired schoolteacher from the Bronx, stood as the judge asked for the verdict. The courtroom was dead silent, not even the rustle of a sleeve. On count 1, racketeering conspiracy, guilty. On count 2, sex trafficking, guilty. On count 3, transportation for the purpose of prostitution, guilty. On count 4, possession of illegal surveillance equipment used in the commission of a crime, guilty. On count 5, obstruction of justice, guilty. One by one, the hammer dropped. Diddy sat motionless, his face a perfect mask. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering. He didn't nod, he didn't blink. His sons, seated behind the defense table, lowered their heads. One wiped his eyes. Cassie was not in the room. She didn't need to be. Her voice had already echoed through those walls. The judge thanked the jury for their service, dismissed them, and then turned to Combs. "Mr. Combs, you've been convicted on all counts. This court will now remand you, without bail, until sentencing." With a gesture, marshals approached. As they placed the cuffs on his wrists, Combs didn't resist. He stood, slow and mechanical, and let himself be led out through the side door. Outside the courthouse, a storm had already gathered. Protesters, supporters, survivors, reporters shouting questions that nobody could answer. One sign read, "Believe." Survivors, another simply, "The empire fell." The verdict spread like wildfire. Within an hour, networks broke into programming. Former collaborators were silent. Brands scrambled to sever the last threads of association. Stocking companies, Link to his media ventures quietly dropped. Streaming numbers vanished from playlists. Cancelled wasn't the word, it was something deeper, something final. Within 24 hours of the verdict, statements began trickling in. From the DOJ, justice delayed is not always justice denied. From advocacy groups, this is a turning point. From the White House, no one is above the law. And then came the second wave, subpoenas. At least 5 other high-profile individuals were reportedly being investigated. Rumors swirled of further indictments. Whispers of sealed evidence naming additional co-conspirators. One leak alleged that at least 2 executives at major labels were aware of the surveillance system inside Combs' homes. Federal investigators made no comment, but their silence spoke volumes. As for Combs, his sentencing hearing was scheduled for September. Prosecutors recommended a sentence of 40 years, citing the scope, duration, and premeditated nature of his crimes. His defense team countered with a plea for leniency, citing age, prior community work, and lack of criminal history. But few expected mercy. In the days that followed, more survivors came forward, inspired, empowered. They spoke not only of Combs, but of other powerful men who'd used silence, money, and fear to maintain control. The tidal wave had only just begun. What began with Cassie's voice in a courtroom had torn open an entire industry. And as the credits rolled on Diddy's long and glittering career, one brutal truth remained. No empire built on pain can last forever.